Welcome to Intentional Separation. What is it and is it right for us? The webinar. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Kate Engler. I am a relationship and sex therapist and the owner of 3 Points Relationships Therapy. It's a practice in Skokie. It is all relationship focused, although we do see individual people and couples and relationships of all types. Our focus is primarily romantic relationships. I wanted to start today with a fairy tale to begin before we dig into the meat. And I'm just also going to let you guys know a fly got in my office. I've been trying to get it out right when I sat down. And the lovely, adorable 3-year-old that lives next door to me was outside having a bit of an issue. I'm not sure what was going on, but she wasn't very happy. So if you hear 3-year-old shrieking, everything's fine, I think her brother maybe is just bugging her a little bit. So that's the background noise. I think we're all used to those realities of life now. So the fairy tale. It's an American fairy tale, although this probably does cross some cultures, but I think it's very specific to ours. And this is a fairy tale about what relationships are actually like, what we're supposed to look forward to. We learn this fairy tale just by living in the very society that we are in and by a lot of really bad movies or good movies, rom-com movies, good fiction. So in the beginning of a relationship, you meet, you fall in love, it looks happy and wonderful. And over time, you realize you should get engaged and then you should get married. And then you have this beautiful life together where you cook in a kitchen that is super Instagram worthy and everything feels delightful. From there, you proceed. You get pregnant, you have the baby. The kids continue to come. Again, beautiful dinners, Instagram worthy photos everywhere. Life feels wonderful. You're doing all the things you're supposed to do. You and your spouse are happy. You buy the house. And even at some point, your teenagers play frisbee with you in the backyard with your dog. Until finally you reach the pinnacle of relationship where you've reached old age together. You're content and happy and enjoying the fruits of your labor and enjoying the finer things in life. This is the American fairy tale that is shoved down our throats all the time. There's a few things, though. These are the things that these fairy tales don't tell you. One is that relationships sometimes look like this. They don't look super happy. And in a long-term relationship, there are very often periods. And believe it or not, even in happy relationships, sometimes there are periods that look like this. It's not so fun. It's not so amazing. And over the course of time, if you find yourself in one of these two places and you feel incredibly stuck, you may get to a place where you think, I don't know what else to do. We're stuck here for the long haul. So in an effort to move things forward, you start to explore your options. There's not really much to do. You're married. What else can you do except for not be married and get divorced? So after you talk with some friends, you finally have the advice to move forward and meet with a divorce attorney. It's just a consultation, they say. Just meet, ask some questions, make sure you're protected. And during this meeting, the divorce attorney tells you all the horrible, scary things that might happen and alerts you to those things and tells you how you need to protect yourself. You find yourself at the end of meeting, you've signed on to an agreement, you are moving forward with a divorce because things simply are not working in your marriage. Before you know it, you find yourself here, unable to even look at your partner and remember that there was a time at which you wanted to do that, and really in a deep struggle, feeling pretty awful. Okay, this is a fairly dire story. I acknowledge that part. Oh, the PowerPoint isn't changing slides for me. Oh no. Okay, I'm gonna go back and start my fairy tale again. Thank you so much. I'm not sure what happened there. Okay, I'm gonna do that. Give me 1 second, a little tech issue here. Oh, here we go. Okay, oh. Let's go back. Okay, fairy tale begins again. So you are also, I'll just share the pictures with you. In the beginning, it's beautiful, wonderful, everybody's happy. You move along, the relationship continues, and suddenly you are moving towards marriage because, of course, marriage is the ultimate goal, as we hear in our culture. And that continues, and then suddenly you have this beautiful, happy life. You move along, you get pregnant, you have babies in whatever way you need to. The happy family expands. You continue to have these beautiful Instagram worthy meals and happy, happy life. You buy the house, and even your teenagers one day want to play frisbee with you in the yard until you're finally at the height of your relationship where you've reached that point that you are enjoying the fruits of all your labor and living the deliriously happy life, right? And then there's what you don't hear. Sometimes relationships look like this, not super happy. And even, believe it or not, in long-term relationships, this can be the case, right? So when you're stuck, you can feel like there's no other options. If you're married, what's the other option? You're divorced. And that can feel daunting and overwhelming. But you go, you seek out the attorney, you get the consultation. Before you know it, you've signed on, and the train has left the station, the divorce is happening. Suddenly, this person you loved, you find yourself sitting in a courtroom with them, unable to even look them in the face and having that painful moment of sharing with your kids what's happening, right? Nobody wants this. It's not an ideal. We all understand how painful that can be. So here's what I want to tell you. I am not a be all end all marriage person. I am a relationship therapist, and I know that can lead people to believe that that's what I'm here to do, is make sure that all marriages stay together. But I don't actually believe that. I really deeply believe that some relationships just simply run their course, and that's okay. But I'll go into a little bit about why I developed this after I explain to you what intentional separation actually is. So, intentional separation is a specific process by which the members of a couple mutually agree to a set period of separation, either in-house or in separate living spaces. It's not legally binding, but the couple agrees in good faith to follow the terms of the agreement. So, part of why I developed this process, and I'm going to go into more depth about what this actually looks like. This is just the official, sort of textbook sounding definition of it. But I'll talk a little bit about more what this looks like in practice. But first, I want to give you a little bit of an understanding of why I came to develop this process. So there's a few things, right? As I said, we don't have a lot of middle ground options in our world. And I think any of you who have been in a long-term relationship, myself included, know it's really friggin' hard sometimes. And you might really love someone, but sometimes things get super challenging. And we all hopefully grow and change over the years. Sometimes you don't grow in the same way that your partner does. There are extenuating circumstances. Having kids is no joke. Working jobs is no joke. All these things put a lot of pressure on a relationship. But when you're struggling, if you can't see a way forward and you feel stuck, you continue to go through this loop. And I hear this from clients all the time, this ping pong match of, do I stay married? Do I get divorced? Do I stay married? Do I get divorced? Right? Very few options. So some of this is about creating a middle ground for people. It's important, I think, that people get a chance to really take a pause when they're struggling. It's interesting to me that we allow this pause in almost every other situation when things are stressful, but for some reason with marriage, we actually prevent that from happening or deter it from happening. Whereas if you were in a heated situation at work before you move forward or made a decision to quit your job or stay, people would recommend that you took a break, right? That you took a break, took a deep breath, got some perspective, and made a decision. So this is about normalizing that middle ground. Obviously, divorce happens. Sometimes it's necessary, but it is a very final option. And it doesn't give people a lot of wiggle room. When that ball has started rolling, it is often very hard to dial it back. And, there's some stats that show between 50 and 75%, depending on what stats you read and where you're getting that, of people who get divorced end up regretting that decision. Now, again, that doesn't mean you have to stay married for the rest of your life if the relationship has run its course. but it's noteworthy that that many people express regret after a divorce. And once you even move things down the road, friends, family, attorneys can keep that ball rolling, whether you really want it to be or not. In addition, so you've probably heard this term trial separation. I think that's the most common that we hear. The thing about trial separation, which is very different from intentional separation, and I'll dig more into why, is that it's usually pretty haphazard. Um, Things happen. Someone says, get out of the house. Someone says, I'm leaving. Somebody's couch surfing. They're trying to figure out where they're going to go, or they rush to get an apartment. There's no plan for the kids or the finances. Are we dating? Are we not dating? What's going on? Mismatched expectations lead to just more resentment, pain, and hurt. Not useful if you're trying to sort things out in your relationship, right? So, in addition, more reasons, I feel strongly about this, which is why I'm giving you my entire set of data of why I decided to do this, is I really believe that this process can help normalize separation as a thoughtful break rather than a foregone conclusion towards divorce. I think that's very much how we talk about it in our culture, that separation is a foregone conclusion. And I really want to move to normalize people taking space when they need it. And finally, this is also something that has been extremely useful for me and anyone else who's working with couples, whether they're attorneys or coaches or therapists. You may find yourselves with couples who are just stuck beyond stuck. You've done what you can and there's no other way. But before you move towards divorce, this can be a step that takes some time and thoughtful approaches before you move into that process. So that is why I started it. I want to check in real quick and see if there's any questions thus far, any tech things that don't seem to be working with anyone, anything you want to share. Okay, chat seems quiet. Don't hesitate to jump back in if you need to. Oh, there's one. Okay, great. Wonderful. Things are working great. Awesome. Thank you guys for the feedback. You're so helpful. You're like my IT people from afar. Okay, so let's dig into the meat of this a little bit. So this agreement, right? This is not a legally binding contract. This is just an agreement that, as I said, in good faith, everybody agrees to follow. Whether you work on it, I mean, I really think working on it with a professional is the best, but that's obviously my opinion. You can do it on your own, but it's just very hard. But here's what I work through in this agreement with couples. And these are kind of the absolute necessary things. I am such a fan of doing relationships in whatever creative way works for you. We have too many limiting beliefs about the way relationships work, I think. So this is kind of at a minimum, and then you can add on whatever else you need. So, and I will just tell you, I was just working on this actually with a couple today, and I had said to them, just so you know, I'm going to move through this in like the most minute detail to the point that is probably going to be annoying. And they said, oh, Kate, I'm sure it won't be annoying. And then today they said, yeah, this is kind of annoying. Like you keep coming back, but it is meant to be explicit for a reason. So that is very well thought through before everybody enters into this process. We want to make sure that no stone is left unturned. And while we can't tell the future, we do our best to anticipate where there are issues. Some of this was developed from my own experiences as a couples therapist. I see where things go sideways. Some of this is just my own experiences as a person in a long-term relationship. So first thing is living arrangements. This intentional separation can be done in-house or in separate spaces. In-house, obviously there are financial ramifications if members of the couple are living in separate spaces. You are paying for two households. If you have a place to go, that's wonderful. Some people do, stay with friends and make that work. That can be difficult because it can be very hard to be settled if you're living on someone's couch. But if that's what you need to do and you have friends or family who are happy to accommodate, that's wonderful. It can be in-house. This is a little harder, I'll be honest. And it's especially if you have kids, right? Because, and we'll talk more a little bit about co-parenting schedules, but if it's your off day, but you're in the house, your 4-year-old might not give a shit that it's your off day, right? And I should have said at the beginning that I tend to swear a lot, so just send it in the chat if you need me to dial it back. So the in-house can be done. It's not like you have to split, oh, you only get upstairs, I only get downstairs, but it's more about the structure of who's doing what, when, and following that along. Obviously, that saves a lot of money to do that. Then there are other options with outside homes. There, if you have children, there's something called nesting, which a lot of people do. This is actually something I'm working on with a few different people right now, where there's an outside home, apartment, something that is shared by the members of the couple. The kids always stay in the house. They go back and the parents go back and forth. It helps limit the amount of disruption for the kids. And or if you have the finances and can maintain two separate households, that's fine too. I do not recommend that the kids start moving back and forth during this process because it is meant to be short term and it can be very disruptive for the children. The next biggest thing is the co-parenting. And this is the place where I annoy people because of how specific I get. But a big part of this is actually to relieve some of the tension at home, which, as we'll talk about later, the benefits, one of the biggest ones is for the kids, even though that might seem odd at this moment. So, co-parenting schedule. Again, as creative as you want. I will work with some people on some of the more traditional types of co-parenting schedules. One example is something called a 2-2-5. One parent is on duty with the kids 2 weekdays, the other has the other 2 weekdays, and then they flip-flop weekends. A lot of this depends on the age of the children. There are some things that are more developmentally appropriate than others, right? Like, so if you have a 2 and a 4-year-old, a week on, week off would not be developmentally appropriate. They're too young to be without their parent for that long. If you have a 15 and a 17-year-old, you might be able to do a week on, week off. The 2-2-5 is kind of the mid-range. You can, feel out what works. It really depends on the kids themselves, but that might be more appropriate. With some younger ones, you may need to figure out different ways so that the kids are seeing both of the parents more frequently. It can be a pain in the butt for the parents, but you can set it up so that you minimize that for parents and for kids, but that's really important. And then finances. I don't typically recommend that people separate their finances during this period unless there are extenuating circumstances. One of those might be if there is a substance abuse issue happening, and we'll talk about whether that's an appropriate time to have an intentional separation a little bit later, or other things, sometimes people do need to separate. But because, again, this is just a sort of in-between move and not moving towards divorce, I recommend keeping it together. But we go into excruciating detail about who spends money, when, how, who has access to money, who needs to report back or not to people about spending, are there spending thresholds that you come to, all of that stuff. Communication. This gets down to how will we communicate during the separation? Will we only text? Will we talk on the phone? If so, how often? Are we going to meet in person to have communication? This might seem odd and something like, why do you have to actually go into such detail about this? Can't you just feel it out? But believe it or not, this is one of the places that can easily go sideways. If someone is thinking during this time that there will still be regular communication and phone calls and seeing each other, and the other person's thinking, no way, I want a break from you, I will text you as a need to know basis, I don't want to hear from you otherwise, that just is rife for problems, right? Then there's the interpersonal relationship or relationships. We talk a lot about what's happened. Are you still considering yourselves a couple during this time? Are you still going to be going on dates with each other? Are you completely separating? How are you talking to other members of your family and friends? What is the framing of the situation? What's the script that you're sharing with other people? Who are the people you're not talking to? That's a big one for people, right? Like, don't tell Aunt Donna she's got a big mouth, she's going to tell everybody else on earth, right? Or people don't want their bosses to know, all sorts of things. We dig into that. Dating, are we, aren't we? Again, you'd be amazed at how many people go into trial separations thinking they're on the same page. I always think about Ross and Rachel on Friends, the we were on a break thing, right? We all saw what happened there, so we know how that can go. Counseling, will you continue with couples therapy if they're in therapy? Like if I'm working with them, are you not? For some people, if they've been through course after course after course of couples therapy, they oftentimes are at a place where they just want to break from it. They don't want to move forward. This is the time not to do that. For other people, if this is a little bit newer or they are still really pretty clear that they want to come back together, they may continue couples counseling. Again, you guys, whoever's doing this gets to decide what works for them. That's not for me to say. I will share the potential pitfalls of each option with the clients, but it's their timing. I'm sorry, their decision. Another big one then is the time frame. I recommend a minimum of 3 months. And I know that probably feels like a very long time, especially if this is something you are just kind of dipping your toes into the water about. But here's the thing. This takes some recalibration, right? And a month just isn't long enough to really feel it out and get a sense of what it's actually like to be apart, how you want to function, get some real breathing room. 3 months is really the minimum, I think, to settle into this process, get everybody used to it, and get a real sense of the space and some breathing room in the relationship. Some people do, we meet, we talk about the time period. Some people automatically start with something like a 6-month time period. Typically, people don't initially plan for a year. I would say most common is 3 to 6 months. At the end, we come back together and decide, are you adding another chunk of time on there, and continue it. But it is a very specific outlined time frame. That way, no one is left flapping in the wind, waiting to figure out what's going on with the relationship. When we come back together, we all agree and make a decision, and everyone is explicitly clear on what that is. And then finally, we talk about what are the expectations for moving forward at the end of the process, is what that's supposed to say. So that's where we come. There's 3 options. We set up an appointment for the end on the day that we sign the agreement. And when we meet again, we decide, do you want an extension? Yes, no, we talk through what that looks like. Are you ready to come back together? Yes, no. If the answer is yes, then we go into very specific conversations. What did you learn during this time period about yourself? What did you learn about the way you contributed to the issues in the relationship? What have you changed during this time? What are you willing to do moving forward? How are you coming back into the relationship differently than when you left for this time period? And how are you going to know what do you have in place to keep the relationship functioning well? What are your support systems? Are you doing therapy? All those things. And the last option is people decide if they're ready to move forward with divorce. Again, if that is the case, then we move into the process of doing that. If they want to work with me or if they decide to do that on their own. But typically, I will at least work with people during that time to, if the option is divorce, to say, okay, what does that look like? How are you going to move forward? We talk through the options of attorneys, mediation, where you go from there, and everything you can possibly imagine in between. It's confusing to get a divorce. We have Google, but that's not the best information. So I often like to offer resources and let people know where they can go to get information, kind of what they can expect from the process from there. Okay, I'm going to give another little pause here just to see if there's any questions about anything. I ran through that fairly fast. And I'll talk a little bit more about some of this as we go too. And as you're sort of mulling over, I'll just share a little bit about some of the work that I've done with people. It's really run the gamut in terms of people that stayed together versus those that decided to split. Let me just see what this question is. What if they disagree on staying together versus divorce? That is an excellent, excellent, excellent question. It does happen, absolutely. It varies based on the couple. That's something that we talk through. And, that's something that we really talk through a lot at the beginning of the prep, right? As we're preparing the agreement. This is what we're going to talk about at the end of this 3, 6, 9, 12-month period. I want you to be ready to come in. If there's a disagreement, usually we'll try to suss out, okay, does this disagreement mean it's worth another 3 months? Or does this disagreement mean if there is someone that is 100% convinced that they are out the door and that they are officially done, then we talk about what that looks like. It can be a very hard conversation. But if the person that has decided they want to move forward with divorce is 100% sure, then I, kind of double, triple, quadruple check with them. And then we discuss what that will look like. It's hard. It's hard for sure. Any other questions? Okay, great. So I'll just share some of the experiences that I've had with people. Um, you know, I don't know that I've had anyone do 3 months, and unless the relationship was very much at the end of its life, I feel like 3 months oftentimes is just a beginning, and people are starting to understand and will often continue to the 6 months period. I rarely, if ever, have anyone go past a year, and that's really the longest. It usually at about 9 months. At the far end of things, people tend to have a real idea of what this looks like, and make a decision moving forward. And every single one of these things that I mentioned has a wide variety of the way that people do it based on the way that their lives work, and based on what makes the most sense to them. So it's really open. And the biggest thing is just making sure that everybody's on the same page and agrees to what we decide before we move forward with the agreement. Okay. So, how do you know if intentional separation is right for you? Oh, another question. Let me pause real quick. What are the reasons people regret divorce? Great question also. In the research that I've reviewed and looked at, it seems to be the primary thing is that people regret that they didn't try harder, that they didn't work harder in the relationship or come back and work harder on themselves. That seems to be the main thing. There are some stats specifically to people who decide to move right to divorce during a moment where infidelity has been revealed. The rates of regret were higher. I think that was the more in the 75% range. And I think people found that over time, when things quieted, the anger wasn't quite there, and they saw that there could have been potential for healing. Again, I think that's a lot of the way we talk about these things in our culture, right? Which is like, stick it to them. If there's infidelity, like, you're done, there's no going back, there's no discussion. And when you're getting divorced, the notion is like, take them to the cleaners, go for the jugular, and none of that benefits anyone in the process. People need to protect themselves. They need to feel okay. And certainly women have been royally screwed over in divorce for a long time until the laws changed. And that's, everybody needs to protect themselves. But the way we talk about it just gets really ugly very quickly. And again, that's part of why I developed this process, to just help slow things down a lot, right? You might still ultimately get divorced, but this gives you some time to really think through it and feel what it's like to be divorced. I mean, this is pretty close. So you get a real sense of what that is. Anything else before we go on? Okay. All right. So if any of these things have been present for you, you've reached a place where you just cannot seem to unglue from it, I would say that intentional separation is likely an option that would be useful. Ambivalence is the, I don't know, I'm in, I'm out, I can't decide, I don't really know. I just keep spinning this over and over and over and over and over again. Polarization, I think we all probably have a good sense of what that is. Like, you are at the place in your relationship where your partner says it's black and you say it's white. It doesn't matter what color it is. You don't care. You just cannot see eye to eye. A conversation about loading the dishwasher turns into World War III. Stagnation and immobilization are kind of the similar, but I think of them slightly differently. Stagnation, I think of more as just the, like, life has completely gone from the relationship. It's sort of like deflated and all the air's been sucked out and nobody can figure out how to move forward, and you're just living in that. I think that's kind of soul crushing for people to stay in a relationship. And we do know that relationship has happiness and well being has a significant impact on overall physical and mental health. So it's not great to be in that. And immobilization, I think of as more of that paralysis. And this is something I hear a lot in my office is that total paralysis about taking a step forward or not. Um, there's a significant fear of judgment, a significant fear of what happens to my children. Will I be perceived as a failure, a bad mother, a bad father, a jerk, all those things, but they just keep running up to that brick wall, even though they know things feel terrible, but they just can't seem to shake it. So these are kind of signs that this might be an option for you. And I wouldn't say if you have a moment of any of these things, but if this has been going on for a long time and you find yourself here, this is a place to go. And then you're not jumping to divorce, as I said, is much more final. It doesn't mean you can't get remarried, but that's quite a process to go through. So, this gives you an option to do something, right? Figure it out. So, what makes intentional separation successful? And these are extremely, extremely important. Obviously, it's called intentional separation for a reason. Being very intentional when creating the agreement. That is why the minutia, right? That is why we go through every single detail and are thoughtful about it. I don't really let anyone off the hook of just like, I don't know, we'll figure it out. And then I just call bullshit on that. That is a resentment waiting to happen, right? Honesty. I mean, obviously, honesty throughout the process about what's going on, but a big part is honesty about what you really need. If you feel like what you actually want is a break from talking to your partner during this time, but you feel guilty or you don't feel like you can say it or you don't want to seem like a jerk, if you go along with something that doesn't actually work for you, you're not helping the process is doomed, right? You're not getting what you actually need and you're going to find yourselves right back where you were. It's hard to have the conversations. Again, this is why having someone to support you, like a therapist or a trained attorney, can be really useful to have those hard conversations, but that upfront honesty piece is critical. And then obviously like throughout, right? There's another one, commitment to working on yourself and or the relationship during the separation. So as I mentioned, couples decide if they're going to keep in working on the relationship. So that's there. But the working on the self piece is, I think, the most important and critical piece. This is the time to get reflective, get in your own therapy, go on a retreat, talk to your friends, read some books, learn to ride a bike long distance, take yoga, whatever it is, so that you can start to get clear on your own stuff. Because part of this is about ending the blaming of the other person, getting explicitly clear on what is your own shit, what is your partner's shit, what did you bring to the table, because all issues are co-created. And what do you want moving forward, whether you stay together or not, right? Like this is the time to do that. And it would be a total waste not to do it. Now, when one partner does and one partner doesn't, it offers a lot of information about what you can expect moving forward. And sometimes that can be the really telling thing about moving towards divorce. I think respect is pretty self-explanatory. Respecting the person, respecting their needs and wants, and respecting their boundaries. Privacy, again, deciding who you're going to talk to and who you're not sharing with everyone in town if your partner feels very strongly in whatever you've agreed to about how you will talk about it and to whom. And also privacy around what you're doing. Like if you are sharing a space, let's say you go the nesting route and you are sharing a space, like don't go digging through your partner's stuff, right? Like don't snoop around in their belongings. Don't open up their computer and read stuff. Don't ask your kids, what was mom doing last night? What was dad doing last night? Like respect the privacy that you've established. That again, like why do this if you're not going to do that? Of course, I feel like this goes without saying, closely follow the terms and respect the established boundaries. Like if you decide that nobody goes into the family home when it's not their day without a call first, don't go into the home without a call, right? Again, you're sending up giant red flags. So if you have any interest in staying in the relationship, you're really working against yourself, and the agreement kind of goes out the window. And then really important is periodic check-ins. I mean, this is a hard process, and there are periods of time it feels really scary. Or you notice that things aren't working. I mean, like I said, we don't have a crystal ball when we're developing this. And so you need check-ins, either just the couple or with the person who's helping them create the agreement about how's this going. Oh, well, we're finding that this schedule for co-parenting totally doesn't work because somebody travels all the time for their job or whatever else. Great, let's reestablish, figure out what's going on from there. When is intentional separation not a good fit? And there are times, right? It's very important. So active physical or mental abuse. I would also add to this financial abuse. Financial abuse being if perhaps there is one member of the couple that is stay at home to take care of the family in the household, and the other one is the primary breadwinner, and they kind of hold the money over their head and don't allow the other person access to it. This can just physical, mental, financial abuse can just be exacerbated during a process, and we don't want to go down that path. Active addictions, and again, some caveats. So here's what I mean by that. If there's an active addiction, but the person is working to get on their recovery, they're in a program, they have a sponsor, they're working steps, they're in treatment, and they're taking positive steps toward that, this may be appropriate. There's a lot that needs to be discussed, but I don't want to say a never, because sometimes this is actually really useful in that setting. The person who is struggling or working to get in recovery can sometimes really benefit from the space where they get to just focus on themselves and the recovery. I don't know any of you who are in a relationship where it's struggling, but like it pushes all your buttons. And if you're also struggling to try to stay sober, that's a lot to handle at one time. If you know that that's kind of off the table, that might be just what you need. And in addition, the other partner who maybe has been with the person struggling, they might really need a break themselves. There's usually a lot that comes with that. And so that can be really useful, but it needs to be highly supported, and probably the specifics need to be checked in more regularly. And not all is appropriate, right? Narcissism, this term gets tossed around a lot now, but I mean really like clinical narcissism. Someone who has absolutely zero care for other people, will manipulate and use people to get what they want no matter what. Even in divorces with a narcissistic partner, it's really intense and requires extremely, extremely rigid rules and regulations and no wiggle room. And this process can just provide more opportunities for exploitation. So we would never want that. If there's little to no commitment by one partner, if we're going through the process and someone's like, yeah, I don't know, I mean, I guess I'll go along with it, or yeah, fine, I don't know, I'm not really into it, or just doesn't buy in, there's just no point. You're not getting anywhere. Both people have to really be willing. It doesn't have to go perfectly. It doesn't mean things can't get tough. It can't mean that usually one person's more scared than another person about what the separation means. That's all okay. But if you're willing to still participate in the process and commit to it, that works. If not, it doesn't. And then coercion. I mean, if this is being held over someone's head, if you don't do this, you won't see the kids. If you don't do this, I won't pay the bills. I mean, that's not going to work. That, is close to the narcissism thing, and is highly problematic. So that's when it's absolutely not a good option. So let me just, okay. So any questions at this point? No, okay, I'm gonna give just another second in case people are wondering. I know this is a lot to process and think through. And just also so you know, you can make your questions private if you want to. If you have questions you don't want to ask here, I'm going to give my contact information at the end too. You're more than welcome to reach out to me afterwards. Oh, any stories of when this has worked really well? Yes, thank you for this question. I'm so happy that you said this. I do. So There was a couple that I worked with a few years ago. They came in specifically, well, actually, they came in related to infidelity. We worked on that. It very quickly turned to a thought about getting divorced. And this couple actually is how I began to sort of really set this out as an actual process. Um, they were both really wanting to be thoughtful. Things had gone awry in the relationship, but they cared very deeply about each other. They'd also both been through pretty horrific divorces previously and really, really, really wanted to focus on their children. So we mapped it out. They did 3 months and they did nesting. They were incredibly conscientious about the co-parenting. They were flexible with each other during that, but they also kept very strong boundaries and very much respected those boundaries. At the end of 3 months, I think they were feeling some, but I was really happy. One of the partners, this is the honesty piece, said, I just need a little more time. I'm just coming to understand what it feels like to be alone. I've actually never been alone, lived alone in my whole life, and it's helping me to understand what my needs are. And the other partner was very respectful. They continued on for another 3 months. And at the end of the time, they both came in and were able to really articulate their own shit and what they could see had happened and where they needed to prioritize the relationship. And they ended up staying together. Now, I want to also say, I put in the category of choosing to divorce when it's the right choice, it going well too, right? There's another couple I worked with shortly after that who also things just felt so fraught, but finances were a big issue. There were other family members in addition to their children living at the home, so it got very complicated. We worked through the process. It was very messy in the beginning as they really figured out how to get the space they needed. And at the end, and again, this for me was such a confirmation of why this process is useful. They ended up getting divorced and they have one of the best co-parenting relationships I've ever worked with. I actually think of them as my model when I'm working with divorcing couples now. They communicate well. By the time they actually made the decision to divorce, it wasn't out of spite or anger or resentment. It was from a clear place of, we care a lot about each other, but this relationship has run its course. And they now are both with other partners and they all do birthday parties for the kids together. They are at every kid function. They are still good friends, and really attribute the time that they took to be thoughtful. So I think of those as two big wins. Let's see. What about borderline person? Oh, yes. For example, if one partner is severely depressed. Okay. What about borderline personality or other mental health conditions? For example, if one partner is severely depressed or has generalized anxiety. Amazing question. Thank you. And one I didn't include. So I really appreciate you bringing this up because it was a real miss on my part. Severe mental health conditions would not be a good fit for this if they are not being treated successfully during that time. Now, like borderline personality disorder, I think this would be incredibly activating for someone who is struggling with that. All the attachment wounds and everything that comes with that would be activated to the nth degree, I think. So it would be a very rare occasion where I would recommend it. Someone who is depressed or generalized anxiety, that's a little tricky. Anxiety comes up a lot. I think the biggest fear I hear, usually there's one partner that wants this more than another. And I often hear, and just heard this morning, I just feel like if we take this break, then that's it, right? This is just going to push us further away, or they're anxious about all sorts of things. And that's understandable. And we spend a lot of time talking through that. And coping with their anxiety and what that means. And what I say to people a lot is, if you end up divorced, this is what it's going to look like anyway. This is a sort of gentler entry into that where we can continue to talk through it. Again, for people who are severely depressed, it needs to be a case-by-case basis. But I'm thinking back on a couple I worked with a couple years ago. One of the partners was fairly depressed, and actually found that this allowed them some time to really focus on themselves without this pressure of feeling like they're failing all the time when they couldn't. Depression drains all your energy and it's hard to get up the oomph sometimes to participate in life. And this allowed them some time every week to know they could just go and take care of themselves. They were able to get into some more intense therapy and try some other options, and they found it really useful. But again, this is why working with someone who is a trained professional, I think, is really useful, because as a therapist, probably less as an attorney, I think sometimes it's a nice collaboration between therapists and attorneys. Um, you can assess, is this person going to benefit from the space or could this tank? But also always holding the notion that if divorce is on the table, this is happening anyway, right? So can this process help them at least see where they might go before they pull the plug entirely? Any other questions? Okay, so I want to make sure to be really mindful. I appreciate you guys are here. This is like almost my bedtime, so anybody that's here, I appreciate. And I want to wrap up on time. And again, this is not it for questions. You can absolutely contact me after this is done, and I'm very, very happy to answer anything. One last couple thing, just benefits that I see from this process and why it just really fuels me to keep going. This is something I feel so strongly about. Um, as I said, it slows things down. I think we all know when you're like in fight or flight mode or things are really just intense, like nobody makes good decisions then. That's not the time to be making major life transitions or major life decisions. So it just helps to kind of put a pause on everything. It's a little bit of a lower stakes way to explore what it feels like to not be together rather than divorce, right? That is a complicated process, again, can be expensive and damaging. And this is a little bit like, okay, we can feel this out and see what is it actually like to do this on my own. Um, but this is one that's really critical too for kids. This is something I hear a lot because people just really, really worry about what this will do. And you know, I can't remember if I said this already, so I apologize if I'm repeating, but what we know about the impact on kids is when the conflict ends, that's when the damage is less, right? So if you stay together and there's continued conflict, or you get divorced and there's continued conflict, that's really what it does the most damage to kids. If you stay together and you're able to address the conflict, or you get separated or you divorce and you are able to address the conflict, like that is extremely helpful to kids. The reason I think this is way better for kids than trial separation, and actually this has been a big driver for me, is it is very clear what is happening, right? The kids, there is a time limit. It's not like mom or dad just disappear in the middle of the night after they heard their parents screaming and they don't know when they're coming back or when they're going to see them again. There's not this wishy-washy stuff where nobody knows what's happening. The parents have the information and the tools to be able to share with the kids in an age-appropriate way what's happening to assure them. Because again, what we know for kids is uncertainty is very, very scary. So they tend to do okay with the information. Now, they might be sad, mom or dad might not be around as much as they wish, but if they know what's happening, there's at least that quiets things. And then again, as I've said, if the divorce is going to happen, you've already done a bunch of the legwork by doing this. A couple I worked with last year at the beginning of the pandemic, we started out with the intention of intentional separation. We worked through all of this, and then they decided fairly quickly to move towards divorce. And they were able to take, and with this couple, we did a very extensive parenting plan for a number of different reasons. They were able to go to the attorney's office and hand them everything that we had done, and the attorney loved it, and they saved hundreds, if not thousands of dollars of the attorney time because this had all been figured out. And that's something I reiterate over and over to people, like, guess what? You're getting divorced. This is going to happen anyway, whether you want to or not. So can we do it now in a thoughtful way versus trying to do this, in a way that might be damaging to everyone? Yeah, those are for me. That's what I see over and over. That's what I see in my couples that I work with and the partnerships that I work with, the benefits of this process. And when it goes badly, it's usually because one or more of those things that I mentioned in the critical elements section isn't happening. And that, again, is just information usually for the partners about what they can expect in the relationship. Any last questions before we wrap? I'll just put my contact information up here for you. So if you would like to reach me, here we go. You can reach me at any of these places, info@3pointsrelationships.com. That's my email. I check it regularly and try to get back to people pretty quickly. Feel free to send any questions if you're looking for options on how to work this, whatever, don't hesitate. And then, all the social media places, the usual. Looks like we have a question. Oh, just a statement. Thank you. I appreciate that. Nice comment. Thanks, guys. Anything else before we go? Let's give it another minute just in case. And just so you know, this is also going to be recorded. None of your names will be present. Nobody is seen, but you will have access to the link. You'll get an email tomorrow probably, or later tonight, even with the link. If you have any issues with it, again, email me. I'm happy to send it out. I really appreciate you guys taking the time for this. And if it's something that you think you want to work on and do more, let me know. I've been exploring some more trainings for therapists and things like that. And if there's interest, I would like to put something together. So let me know. All right, guys, I think that's it. I hope you all have a wonderful evening. I'm so happy that you joined me. Again, I'm Kate Engler. I appreciate all your really, really thoughtful questions. That was wonderful. And I hope that you guys found this useful. Take good care. Have a good night. Bye-bye.